Hello, I'm Stephen Andrews, Outlaw Bookseller, author, bookseller, psychogeographer, general culture vulture, and today we're going to talk about the Avian Macabre of Stephen Gregory. This video will probably get appended to my folk horror season, which is kind of drawing to a close because I've come to the conclusion that at the moment there are way too many people trying to squeeze everything into folk horror, and they're almost everything with a localized rural setting or anything with supernatural beliefs or irrational beliefs in it is being appended to folk horror globally, and it's starting to get a bit silly and it's getting a bit vague and meaningless. So I'm going to make some further statements about that later on. I will still talk about folk horror occasionally as I talk about hauntology, psychogeography, the intersection of those concepts with literature, film and TV. So there'll be more of that coming, and I'll be talking about them largely from a science fiction perspective. But today, I want to talk about Stephen Gregory, a really wonderful and neglected writer whose work really sort of falls into the horror bricolage. And if you're wondering why I'm using bricolage rather than genre, I have shot a video which is about the idea that horror is not a genre but a bricolage. And I want to talk about Gregory today because I think he's a very fine writer that everybody who likes every kind of good writing, genre fiction or otherwise, should read. Gregory was born in 1952 in Derby. He's often described as Welsh. I don't think he actually is Welsh. I think he's English, but I'm not certain. Hopefully he'll get in touch and confirm. And he studied at University College London, I believe, and he became a teacher. He spent a lot of time travelling, and he spent a lot of time in North Wales, which obviously affected him deeply and he fell in love with, because a lot of his books are set in Wales, all in the north pretty much. And I first came across him in 1986, I think, or 86, 87, for the paperback edition of this book, The Cormorant, which is a novella. It says a novel. It's a short novel. I'm quite happy with the idea that the novel can be 120 pages. Personally, I know these days publishers are pushing people to, go for 300 pages and basically create work which is too long for its themes a lot of the time. This is slim, it's elegant, it's incisive, it's amazingly well written. The great thing about this was that what Gregory seemed to do in this was bring back the literary element of horror and trying to remind people that in Britain we have a tradition within the main corpus of British literature that anybody can write ghost and horror stories. And of course, if you look back the 19th century, everybody did. Charles Dickens, the Signalman. We had people like Arthur Machen, who was probably more solidly, you could say, a genre author, even though genres didn't exist in the way they do now as commercial constructs. Look at Thomas Hardy, The Withered Arm. All sorts of people wrote sort of ghost and horror stories. It wasn't unusual. So Stephen Gregory, very fine prose. And what this did, this combined a sort of story of possession or haunting with very, very wonderful, beautiful, clear, clarid nature writing of the kind that, if people like Robert Macfarlane and those sort of people, these sort of psychogeographic type of nature writers who've emerged in the last 15 years would love. Yet he still remains kind of underappreciated, unknown. For example, I don't think there's any reference to his work at all in Edward Parnell's Ghostland, which is one of my issues with Ghostland. I don't think Parnell is as well read in British horror and ghost stories as he needs to be. I think he just knows the canonical names, and not to disparage him too much because it's a great book. But anyway, this is fantastic stuff. I'll tell you a bit about the plot. Basically, the protagonist and the narrator, he has a young family, and he inherits a cottage in North Wales from his uncle who's died. There's one caveat in the will, which is that the family must look after the uncle's pet until it dies. And the uncle's pet is a cormorant, of course, not an animal, a bird that can be sort of domesticated in any real sense. So it's quite malevolent. It sort of leaves its excrement everywhere. It pecks at everything, and it's quite vile. But despite all this, the narrator starts to find himself bonding with the cormorant when he goes to the beach with it. And there's wonderful scenes, and it's really sort of bucolic and beautiful when he describes how he bonds with the animal and sees the beauty of nature and the stark, austere beauty of North Wales. And it's really quite fantastic. But then there's a dark turn to it. And I won't tell you anymore. This has recently been reissued by Parthian Books. So you can get it in paperback for about $8.99. I've just managed to restock it in the bookshop I work in. So if you haven't read it, you can get it now. Your local bookshop probably won't have it because he's an obscure figure. Ask them to order it, get it in and read it because it's absolutely fantastic. If you like nature writing, horror, really, really well written science fiction, fantasy, and you really should go for it. A few years after this, Piccado did an anthology called the Piccado Book of the New Gothic. And I personally think that Gregory spearheaded this. And even though we had some great writers at that time who were trying to write more literary horror, people like Nicholas Royle, people like Christopher Fowler, you know, a lot of these people sort of, their work didn't always sell as well. And for example, Christopher Fowler turned to writing crime fiction and what have you. And the New Gothic also featured people like Patrick McGrath, who's still around. He's a really good writer. Patrick McGrath, of course, wrote Spider, which was made into a film by David Cronenberg, which is criminally unavailable on Blu-ray, hint, hint. So read that, give it a try, it's really good. And this won the W. Somerset Maugham Award, and the Somerset Maugham Award is an award for first novel, and the prize money has to be spent on travel to broaden the winner's mind, so they have more things to write about. Because Maugham was a well-travelled man. He said that really he felt that travel was really important for writers. And he sort of wrote stuff set over the world himself, and he virtually invented the spy genre with Ashenden, and he did all sorts of great stuff. Great story called The Lotus Eater set on Capri, which is one of my favourite places on earth. And so Stephen did travel a lot then, but he, soon after the Cormorant, produced this book, The Wood Witch. I bought this new. And let's see, this was 1988, and I remember the bookshop I was working in there, so it was probably at my happiest in my time in the industry. And this is about mushrooms, decay, dank forests, death, and it's very, very heavy and gloomy and wet. You get the real feel of nature in it again. And if you like something like The Wasp Factory by Ian Banks, it's not as sensational, but you'd like the heavy, doomy fall. If you like Mythago Wood by Robert Holdstock, you'd love this. Really, really fantastic stuff. This is a signed copy. It's dedicated to somebody called Peter. I think I bought this in Hay-on-Wye for about 10 quid. And I've had this for like 30 years at least. Then there was a gap for quite some time then, into the 90s, because those were late 80s. We didn't see anything Stephen for a while. And so with the early promise, because the Cormorant was a bit of a cult hit, and there was a BBC TV film with Ralph Fiennes, who incidentally is in Spider, which I don't think has ever been reshown. It's not bad. It didn't quite capture the feel of the book because the prose is so magnificent, and it sort of glitters blackly like anthracite coal, the black coal of Wales, with the steam coal which powered the Industrial Revolution, ironically. And in the early 90s, all of a sudden, we had The Blood of Angels, which was published by Piccado. Strange, because, you know, this probably most of these went to libraries, and it's a big, big, thick book, much bigger than his other books, full-length novel. I'll just read you from the flap, and it says, it's 1966, and Harry Clear is 25, red-haired, tall, and rather thin, shy and nervous. He's nevertheless appealing to women in a curious way. One day, driving to visit his beloved little sister Lizzie, Harry picks up an attractive blonde hitchhiker, and life will never be the same. And it's about obsession. A lot of it takes place in North Wales again. There's a part where the character lives in like a caravan on a beach. And again, the way that Gregory invokes the sort of beauty of, you know, a cold beach in North Wales, and the sunshine glittering on the water, and the sort of ever-present dampness and salt in the air, and it's really fantastic. It's really got an eldritch feel about it. Some very gothic things happen, and I don't want to describe it too much. It is actually a long time since I've read it. I need to reread it, reread it, but it is really quite wonderful. And again, this meshing of horror story and nature writing is fantastic. So the good thing about these books is, even though they're neglected in the UK mostly, most of them are published in the States by Valancourt, who are published, I've mentioned several times. I've got quite a few Valancourt books. I've got loads because I mostly have the original British ones anyway, but they're real Anglophiles and they do great stuff. They tend to publish neglected British writers like Francis King, Colin Wilson. They do Christopher Priest in the States, Stephen Gregory, lots of other things. They do lots of sort of horror and fantasy, which is neglected. They do a lot of cult books. So Valancourt, well worth looking. Some of their books you can get in the UK, some you can't. They also do the very wonderful Paperbacks from Hell series. I'll just show you what they look like. So then, after Blood of Angels, Gregory disappeared, or seemed to disappear for quite some time. He went and did some screenwriting for a year with William Friedkin, director of The Exorcist, of course, you know, so there's a connection with possession there between the Cormorant and The Exorcist. I don't really know what came out of that. I'm not certain much actually solid came out of that. That's a common experience for writers. They go to Hollywood, they produce work, it never gets made, what have you. They get paid anyway, but of course they want to see it made, really, because that would lead to greater sort of riches, and you know, and rightly so. He was teaching for years. I think he was in Borneo for a very long time. And then there was a huge gap until about 2012, when a book suddenly came out, a paperback original called The Perils and Dangers of This Night. Set in a school, I seem to remember. It's my least favourite book by him, and I don't own it anymore. I was greatly disappointed at the time with it. I should reacquire it and look at it again, look at it in the context of his wider oeuvre, because he does have certain themes. Teachings, there are a lot. Wales, there are a lot. Old dark houses, and he's been compared to Edgar Allan Poe a lot, and I think that's a fair comparison. Though of course he doesn't have the sort of thick, sort of sometimes turgid romanticism of Poe. It's more clarid and open-hearted and what have you. But you know, spiritually it's there. You know, there's some real sort of darkness and solitude there. It's fantastic stuff. So he apparently was writing the books which have appeared since. He was writing them while he was in Borneo, is one theory. So other things have come from him. The book that came after Perils and Dangers was this one, The Waking That Kills. And Solaris did a paperback of this. And I don't know, mine's gone, so I got this Valancourt edition. Really, really nice. And again, birds come up a lot. And, you know, birds return to his work. Because as I say, the first one, The Cormorant, and there's the other books which don't mention birds so much, the nature's in them. And this is about somebody who becomes a live-in tutor for a teenage boy. There's a lot about teaching and the problems that children go through, especially young boys. And it's you know, the boy's haunted by the ghost of his dead father, possibly. And there are birds in this, as you will imagine from there. And this is a Valancourt one, really, really great. I think you can get this one in the UK. Some you can't get for licensing reasons. I think you can get this one. You can get them online, of course. So that's really great. That was a more of a return to form. There is another one called Wakening the Crow, which I haven't read yet and I don't own. And Valancourt do that, but it's a print-on-demand hardcover, so I must get that. And I'm very interested to see what he does with corvids. I think that'll be fascinating. He does know his stuff, he does his research properly, and he clearly loves wildlife, which is really important. But he's also awake to the sort of alien part of animals that, you know, we realise when we come up close to them, that they are like us, and yet they're not like us as well. More recently than that, there's this wonderful, beautiful limited edition from PS, Great British limited edition publisher, called A Plague of Gulls. This is absolutely fantastic, and it's set in Carnarvon, and let's see, this is I'll just take up, there's a little bit of paper in that. This is a signed numbered limited edition. I think there's only 100 copies of this. 200. This is number 120 of 200. And narrative of a young boy lives with his mother and his stepfather. He plays the guitar, and he sort of ends up sort of befriending this gull. And it has rather difficult consequences for his habit, his hobby of playing the guitar. And there's all sorts of stuff, and it's really well invoked. And of course, it riffs on that thing that, you know, in British society these days, and for a long time, gulls are viewed as, you know, vermin, you know, an absolute nuisance. And yet, you know, people forget that, you know, it's their world too. You know, we've sort of pushed animals out, but gulls are resourceful. They're miracles and marvels of evolution. And, you know, and they take advantage, you know, and let them do it. You know, it's absolutely fine with me. You know, I want to coexist with them. I think they're fantastic beings. And yeah, this is a great book, really, really good. This has not had a UK paperback edition. Valancourt, luckily, do a paperback. This edition is out long at the print now. So do get hold of that. It's fantastic. And it came out pretty much a little while before this book, which I've talked about a couple of times on the channel, by Nicholas Royle. This is the Nicholas Royle who was born in 1957, not the Nicholas Royle who was born in 1963, who is the person more associated with horror fiction, though this Nicholas Royle has written a book called The Uncanny, which is a literary and philosophical theory book. And this is an English guide to bird watching, and this is about an old couple beset by gulls, so there's a kind of affinity there between those two books. So, you know, gulls are beginning to become the new crows. For a long time, crows and, you know, their various things, ravens, jackdaws, rooks, what have you, have been, you know, figures in fiction used symbolically, and of course they have their roots back in the Nordic thing with Odin having the two ravens and what have you. So gulls are sort of coming into their own, especially as we move into this age where we have lots of landfill and there's lots of rubbish on the streets and fast food, and gulls, you know, they're becoming the sort of the emblematic bird of the modern mythology of our times. You know, they're ever present. So you know, so there's a certain affinity there, and this is fantastic. This, to me, I think was his best book since Blood of Angels. Really, really good. I really felt this was return to form, though as I say, I've not read Waking in the Crow yet, which precedes this a bit. And interestingly, talking about crows, I'm rereading this wonderful children's book, The Dark is Rising, by Susan Cooper, which is the second in the Dark is Rising sequence. And there's an interesting part in this where there's a figure early on, a mysterious dark figure who is always being attacked by rooks. And of course, rooks are corvids, they're crows, so that's quite interesting. But I'll talk about those again. And at the moment, I'm also reading this collection of short stories by Gregory called On Dark Winds. Very beautiful, as you see, and this is Valancourt as well. And I'm about halfway through it, and it's got short stories which are the kernels of the novels. There's a short story called The Cormorant, which is like a quasi prequel to the novel. There's a wonderful story in here called Celandine and Periwinkle, which is really, really it's indescribable. It's about boys in a school, and they have one teacher who's obsessed with owls and owl pellets, and he takes them out to look for owl pellets, and one of the kids goes missing. It's a fantastic story, it really is. And there's just great stuff in here, and there's lots of things about owls and other animals and what have you. I'm reading a story called The Dreaming Pig, which is really interesting, about a blind pig, which obviously has different dreams to the other pigs, you know, according to the small farmer's boy who's watching the animals. And it's great stuff, really good. As I say, with Gregory, the quality of the prose is clear, and yet it's poetic, but not in a sort of cloying way. There's a lot of space in it. The incidents sometimes are quite small, but very telling. He tells episodes rather than stories, I would say. They don't always have this neat beginning, middle, end thing. Sometimes they're just very reflective, and you know, and they're like our own lives. They're mysterious. We try and sometimes put a narrative where there is just contingency, just chance, and things roll out and happen. And that's very much present in his work. And I think he's very fine indeed. And I'm absolutely loving this. It's fantastic. So the Avian terror of Stephen Gregory, the macabre, the odd, the haunting. I can't think of any other writer I've read who manages to get across the beauty and at the same time the malevolence of nature. And of course, we impose these things upon it. It's anthropomorphism. We impose these things on it. And I would say, if you haven't read him, the best place to start is The Cormorant. And as I say, Parthian do it now, so you can get it. And I would really recommend getting hold of A Plague of Gulls, because it's fantastic. And you know, he does really unexpected things, and I just think he's absolutely fantastic at his best. So that's Stephen Gregory, a writer you should get out there and discover. Just one more nod to a book which I've just reacquired because I couldn't find my original copy. I think it might have gone in a box to Hay-on-Wye, and I've just reacquired Victor Hugo's Toilers of the Sea, which is the basis of the Stranglers song Toiler on the Sea. And I've been promising fans of the band, I do a lot of videos about the band and their literary connections because there are so many, that I'm going to do a piece about this. So I'll be doing that sometime soon. So I hope even if you're not a fan of the Stranglers, you'll tune in and watch this, because I haven't really done many classics yet, and this is quite an obscure classic and a very interesting one. So I'll be doing that at some point. So this is Outlaw Bookseller signing out for now and urging you to immerse yourself in the Avian Macabre of Stephen Gregory. Bye for now.